Lakeshore Drive. Ride 43 minutes, 95th to downtown. The tollways are heavy with delays pretty much across the board, including eastbound Adams Tollway 47 all the way to Gulf, the Reagan Tollway 56 to the Ike. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Windy, frigid with snow and blowing snow. 1 to 2 inches more could accumulate. High of 19. Turning clear and bitterly cold overnight. A low of 0. 17 right now at O'Hare. 20 along the lakefront. Wind chill at O'Hare is 2 above. Wind chill in Waukegan right now is 2 below 0. Your next news update is at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.
This Peter Thiel review in First Things stands alone as an interesting commentary. One of the 4 aspects of the decadence of modern culture, repetition. As Thiel explains, repetition names the condition of our culture, endlessly remaking remakes of remakes. Whereas the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s all had distinctive by the decade styles in design, clothing, music, art. From the 90s to now feels like one big remix. We're stuck in a boomer culture loop, which Dothat explains in his book. From J.J. Abrams' remaking George Lucas' Star Wars to Martin Scorsese remaking himself. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the explanations for this culture loop we're stuck in, as Thiel describes, may be found in this piece by our next guest, Brian Patrick Eha, who is the former editor at Entrepreneur, author of How Money Got Free, and contributed to City Journal. His piece in City Journal on the new Puritans may help explain why we're not as culturally distinct and creative as perhaps we've been in previous generations. For more on that, we're pleased to be joined by Brian Patrick Eha now. Brian, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you talk of the new Puritans and the new moralism, which now, as you write, obscures cultural creation in America. Why don't you develop that argument for us?
Sure. Well, essentially, there has come to be what I call the twin notions of this movement, which are that art and entertainment, cultural products, as well as those who produce them, should be subject to ideological and behavioral purity tests, and that essentially those that are found wanting, the term is problematic, they should be kind of thrown out in favor of more politically helpful or edifying material. And this ends up amounting to a kind of narrowing, a drastic narrowing in some cases, of the possibilities for art and entertainment and what can be considered, laudable and praiseworthy. But it goes, of course, much deeper than that.
Yeah, I mean, so this is sort of a version of the cancel culture argument, and you see it in the interesting thing is you see it in practice a lot in real time. Perhaps most recently, this book, American Dirt, which was initially recommended by Oprah, but then was criticized by identitarians for the author not being a person who came to this country illegally, so how dare she culturally appropriate somebody else's story of coming to this country illegally and pretend that she's some sort of authority on it. And I mean, good grief, she's just writing a novel about it, telling a story, but it was seen as illegitimate in certain quarters. And of course, the author, rather than make the point that I'm making or you would make, she apologized. She said, yeah, they got a point, and I tried to be sensitive, and you need to placate the mob. So that's what's happening in real time. But I just know, and I want to see if you can help us understand, why can I go to the Chicago Lyric Opera and see Wagner's Ring Cycle? I mean, that was, Hitler's favorite composer. Why can I go to the Lyric Opera and see Boris Godunov? Mussorgsky was Stalin's favorite composer. And why aren't we going back and, expunging all the great artists from time immemorial the way that we're trying to do in present time?
Well, don't worry. Listen, there are efforts to make that kind of thing happen.
I'm so
In my
comforted.
essay, yes, comforting, isn't it? In my essay, I talk about the fact that at there was a lecture hall at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, a famous hospital where in this one lecture hall there were 31 portraits of eminent scientists and physicians. But those were recently removed because of some complaints by a few people that essentially too many of these portraits turned out to be, of white men from back in the day, and that was no longer seen as reflecting the makeup of the student body that was getting lectures in that hall. And so rather than kind of just, accept that history, they decided to remove them. Also, the portraits of psychologist William James and other thinkers were removed from Harvard's psychology department for similar reasons. So, don't worry that they're coming for Wagner too, I'm sure, if they haven't gotten there already. But I think the reason you're able to still hear Wagner is, not only that he's kind of a perennial favorite and perhaps a cash cow in some sense for the institutions that still organize his music, performances of his music, but it's that we used to be able to, kind of in a liberal society, a small L liberal, we had an understanding of that you didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, essentially, that there were cultural riches from all over the world at different times in history that could be, pleasing or beneficial or invigorating to experience. And it didn't matter always if, the person was not a perfect human being who created those things. But you mentioned cancel culture, and I think that is an important overlap with what I'm talking about in the essay, but it really goes deeper than that. The reason I use the term the New Puritans, and I think that's important, is because, well, what do we think of the Puritans today? We remember how rigid and austere they were. We remember their moral censoriousness. And in that term, I first want to convey the moral superiority and censoriousness that are the defining traits of these people. And second, because I think the name suggests an important truth, which is that social justice has become a kind of secular religion, complete with articles of faith and, unquestioned dogma and saints on one side and sinners on the other, and just a whole catechism of beliefs which the adherents are expected to commit to memory and then constantly revise as new gospels are sort of handed down. And one group kind of falls out of favor, or comes into favor, and so on. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, that at times social justice language is really just a smokescreen for power politics. It functions that way because, well, if you're an individual or a member of a certain group, however you define that, and you say openly, hey, I want more power for myself, well, that's not a particularly noble goal, and nobody is really going to feel that inclined to grant that to you. But if you say instead, hey, you have to give me this because of equality, or because I'm a marginalized victim, or because I've been oppressed, etc., it becomes harder to argue against that, right? And so in some ways, it's a smokescreen. But yeah, go on.
And what? Yeah, and one of the consequences, as Teal was remarking in reviewing Dothat's new book, is cultural stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
right.
is that a fair? Is that a fair read on that?
No, I think it absolutely is. That the original Puritans, they kind of, they came to the American colonies because they wanted to assert their own independence, their own independent religious judgment, and not have to follow all the precepts of the Catholic Church or the Church of England. Ironically, though, they ended up condemning other groups like themselves, other believers who, cherished the very freedoms on which they had themselves relied. And similarly, these kind of moral censors that we have now, they want to promote, only the art that they find edifying and politically useful, and they want to kind of suppress anything else, even if it might be of greater artistic merit, even if it might be of more lasting value in some sense, or even more progressive in maybe a real materially positive sense. And so that, of course, leads to cultural stagnation.
And then what are your thoughts? I mean, that wasn't part of your article, but this erasing of our history. I mean, think about it. In the last few years, all those Confederate statues that were taken down, and is this ever going to end, or is this just the new normal? If it offends somebody, then we'll just get rid of it.
Well, I'm of two minds in some ways about the Confederate statues, but I think the erasing of the history is definitely a fairly deplorable trend. I mean, I do say in my essay that modern progressivism elevates the act of driving one's plow over the bones of the dead to the level of a political mandate. It basically says that that's what we need to do all the time. We just can't ever look back to the past. We can't really embrace traditions. We can't even have respect for the moral complexity or gray areas of the past. We really just need to sort everything into black and white and kind of, throw everything into the wood chipper that doesn't serve our current agendas. And that's just to use one of their favorite words, a very toxic way of looking at the world and looking at history. And it's an impoverished way as well.
Yeah, and that Manichaean view of the world, to sort of paraphrase Andrew Sullivan, who wrote last year, we're all on one big college campus now. We all live on one college campus now, talking about the culture, the censorious nature of the culture, the redefinitions and the rewriting of history. It seems to me like we're all in one big political campaign now. We're all political candidates. And what do you do in a political campaign? You are endlessly trying to jackpot the other candidate. Yeah, it's an endless series of looking in the past, trying to manufacture things that aren't there that you wish were there. And that's sort of what it seems to me the left does, the social justice warriors do with people with whom they disagree. It is looking to end them, to defeat them.
Right. Or the other thing is the urge to rehabilitate as they define it. You've probably noticed all of these movies and books and things that are being remade in new versions with like more racially diverse casts or with an all-female cast instead of an all-male cast like Ghostbusters and so on. And it seems like a way for them to kind of claim the cultural cachet that these movies and books and so on still possess, while at the same time kind of assimilating them to their own ideology.
Yeah, no, that's a good explanation of what's happening. I agree with that. He is Brian Patrick Eha. He's former editor at Entrepreneur. He's the author of How Money Got Free. And check out his piece, which I'll tweet out from at City Journal, city-journal.org, the column The New Puritans. Brian, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
What would you do if you knew there was a place to learn step-by-step strategies designed to help you make the right moves inside the financial markets? A place to develop skills that can help you generate income and build confidence towards your retirement goals. At Online Trading Academy, we know